The game wardens had been swearing they were going to get me. And I thought...
The Tarrant County game wardens?
Well, I was hearing about it. They said, we're going to get him this year in the Kennedy. We're going to be waiting for him. So I thought, what a beautiful thing to leave them sitting down there waiting on me, slip them a Mickey looking for me there, and hunt right here in Tarrant County. So I started hunting this buck. And the first time I went in there and jumped him immediately, and I was not expecting that. I didn't have my light tied on my gun yet. I went in about midnight. What I did was there was a bar across 199. It's called Pair of Dice bar. Mm-hmm. And I parked my old Coupe de Ville there, but not until I had dropped off my gun and spotlight on a little side road to this 200 acres next to the park. Okay, I knew they were cutting through that. Well, that's where I was going to enter, so I go in there, and I don't walk probably 400 yards into that property. I ran across the highway, got to my gun and all, backpack, got geared up and started in. I didn't have it wired on yet, and I was just going to assess the situation, maybe even leave my gear and make a recon look and then plan my hunts. I figured it was going to take me several trips, and it did. But what happened was I jumped this big buck point blank. I couldn't even light him up, but he had to be one of the big ones, probably the big one. The body on this deer was so big. I'm walking in at about 40 yards in the dark. I see this deer, and I go, there's a deer right there. And then I see it pay attention to me and throw his head up and immediately haul ass. And I was like, God, when he flashed and I saw the white flash as he wheeled, and his big old rooster tail come up, and I went, that was the big deer right there. I'd blown it. I won't get him tonight. Well, I walked around all in there that night, and about 5 in the morning, I saw these 2 pair of eyes, and I said, I'm going to ground check one of them. One of them might be him, because there was supposed to be 3 together. Yeah. But I figured it's probably the lesser 2, because I thought I was convinced I'd seen the big one. So I shoot offhand about 115, 20 yards. I barely caught this buck in the sternum, but the bullet went all the way down, was under his skin by his pecker, when I found him. But I didn't find that deer the rest of the night. And I put my gun and backpack down in that 200 acres next door where I shot him, but the blood trail went across the Blacktop Road over into the park. So I was like, I got to find him, cut his head off, and run out of here. I ain't going to be able to cape him. I ain't going to have time. It was breaking light on me. So I'm on the blood trail for 500 yards. Steady, good, dripping blood trail. I'd slice the bottom of his heart or cut the wall of the heart, and he was bleeding. And the spleen artery, that low, I cut the spleen artery, and he was bleeding. And he bled out. And I found him after 20, 30 minutes after daylight. Well, I cut his head off and ran, all the way back and got out of there. It was a 13-point typical, about a 160 class buck. Well, that was a good deer and all, but it wasn't the one I was after. I was still after the big one, and I saw the single drop time buck 3 times other than that, and passed him waiting for the big double drop with both. That deer had a broke off drop. So I was like, he's a younger brother, and I don't want to kill him while he's young, and with a broke drop time, I'll leave him alone. I might shoot him in another 2 years or something, but I wanted the big deer. That's the way I've always been. It's like, I go in a bar, I ask the prettiest girl there to dance. Well, when I go hunting, I want the biggest deer I know is there if I've seen him. And I was on to him, so I wanted him. And I didn't get a shot. I would light him up. One morning, I went in there and put 400-yard drip line of doe and heat piss. It was that old Get a Buck brand. And it wasn't even breaking light yet. And where I screwed up was I didn't have a black lens cover on the spotlight that was screwed on my gun. It was just light enough that finally, as he got about 35 yards from me, he was coming from drip to drip to drip of that doe piss. And I saw one of the big drop tines coming down over his shoulder, and I go, it's him. And I started up. Every time he'd move again, I'd start putting the gun up a little higher, and I got the gun facing him where he could see that reflector in that spotlight, and he spotted me and looked over there, took off, jumps big old high leaps and leaps across this creek and disappears in the brush on the other side. Well, after that, he really knew I was after him, so I was really having trouble spotting him again. And I walked upon him at night one night, and I could smell him real strong, these old pissy hawks. And I go, there he is, he's right here. And I heard the doe squirt, and I heard him squirt behind her. And I let him up, and he would run this way and that way and this way and that way and keep a tree between me and him, them cedars in that area. He was using them cedars to block my view. He was smarter than hell. Smarter than any deer I'd ever been after before. And so I had a close counter with him then, and as he crossed one deal, I could see all the trash sticking out and the big old drops, big old fat bases. I knew he was exactly what the guy told me he was then.
Yeah.
I never did kill that deer, but I went on some morning scout recons, and what I did, that old Cadillac was quiet, and I drove right up beside this guy in an old blue Chevy truck, and he's sitting there with his motor running loud. He didn't hear my Cadillac pull up right beside him, and he had binoculars looking out into the buffalo pen. There was a high fence buffalo pen, about a 7-foot fence, and they kept the bison in there for people to look at traveling through the park. And he knew that big buck was back in there, and he had his glasses on him, looking at him back in the timber. And I couldn't see the deer, but those buffalo were right in front of his truck, too. And I watched him. I go, he's on to that big deer, and he's trying to get him out of here. I said, he's probably got a 22 in the truck. Anyway, I said, there sure are some ugly critters, aren't there? And he went through the cab of that truck. I scared the shit out of him. He had a guilty conscience, of course. And then, he felt like I was probably a warden or something at first thought. Well, then he looked at me and he goes, yeah, they're ugly as hell. And I said, yeah, have a good day. And I drove off, and I knew I'd wrecked him with the buck. Well, the rumor got out that big deer was killed.
Yeah.
And the game wardens thought I got it. Once they figured out through the grapevine that I was hunting that deer, they started watching it. And I quit hunting out. I did kill the single drop deer later, about midnight one night on a Friday night at midnight. I rattled him up and shot his ass, So I got 2 out of the 3. But I took that deer out whole. I wasn't going to let them DNA match me on that one, because I was going to probably show that head to some people. But what I did was I caped him off, backstrapped him, quartered him, left all the guts inside his rib cage, didn't bust him open any at all. And I just, first trip, I took the quarters from the back straps and the cape and the head to the road about 2 miles away. Then I came back and I took that carcass and just shoved it down in my backpack with the neck sticking up out of it. Strapped him in, picked that up, carried that and my other gear out of there, and never went back. But, my buddy Big L came the next morning to see the head. And he looked at it and he goes, I was going to finish the story because this is a funny part. I walked across the highway to the Cadillac and circled around and came in on that side road, and I had all them quarters in the backpack with the carcass in it, and I just pulled that coupe de ville door open and threw that front passenger seat forward, and I started throwing quarters in the back seat of that old Cadillac right on the fuzzy seat, blood everywhere. And I mean, it was more fun than getting to do a double axe murder on both my ex-wives at the same time. I was laughing my ass off, threw it down in drive and peeled out of there and went out the back way. But my buddy Larry come over the next morning, he saw that rack and then he saw that carcass in the alley, and he goes, you be a deer hunting motherfucker. But he said, now you're the king in your own county. But I got 2 out of 3. But I'd give anything to kill that big double drop one, though. He was a King Kong buck. He was a gorilla.
Did you ever hear of him getting killed?
That one guy in that blue truck's who I think shot it.
Really?
I told the game warden this story. I told Larry Osborne. I said, I know who killed that deer. He said, well, we thought it was you. I said, I did not kill that big deer. I said, that guy in that blue truck is the one that shot it. It was a blue Chevy truck, an old one. It was one of them $100 trucks. When the law got severe, where they take your truck, when they made those confiscation laws, restitution, confiscate your vehicle, all that, when that went into effect, every outlaw in South Texas bought a $100 truck and a $50 gun they could throw away. When this all comes out, and when I tell that story in part 2, I'm going to say, all right, you know who you are. You owe it to me to show me that head. You have to come forward and take me to look at that buck. The one drop time was about 4 fingers wide, like a boat oar. It had a paddle to that one drop. And that one was 2 inches longer than the other side. Had a 12-inch drop on this side, a 14-inch drop on the other side, with a big palmation. Parks and Wildlife should have some pictures of that deer. No telling how many people walking that park had photographed that deer.
Yeah.
I mean, surely somebody had took a good picture of it. He was crossing 199 to the south side of the freeway.
Yeah.
And spending summer times over there some.
Do you think he was a 200-inch deer?
He was a 195-ish deer. I don't think he'd go over 200, but he was scared the hell out of it. He was that big. Yeah, he could have went over 200. He was just everything you could ever hope for.
Yeah.
Now, he was the limit on what you can expect a whitetail to have.